I never imagined that after giving my son every piece of my heart, every dollar I had, and every dream I sacrificed, I'd hear the words that shattered everything I believed about family. Mom, you don't belong in my new life anymore. Those weren't words spoken in anger. They were calm,
Cold. Planned.
and somehow that made them hurt even more. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 59 years old, born and raised in Columbus, Ohio, where I spent nearly my entire life believing that if you loved your children enough, they'd never forget who stood beside them when life was difficult. I was wrong. For 32 years, I worked as a registered nurse at a local hospital. Long shifts, sleepless nights, missed birthdays, skipped vacations. I accepted every sacrifice because I had one goal: to give my son, Ethan, a better life than the one I'd had. When Ethan was only 8 years old, his father died after a sudden heart attack. Overnight, I became both mother and father. Money was tight. There were weeks when I quietly ate peanut butter sandwiches so Ethan could have fresh fruit and healthy meals for school. I never told him children shouldn't carry their parents' burdens. He grew into a smart, kind young man. At least, that's what I believed. He earned a business degree from a university in Chicago, Illinois, and after graduation landed an impressive marketing job. The day he called to tell me he'd been promoted, I cried harder than I had at my own retirement party. Every sacrifice suddenly felt worth it. Then he met Vanessa. At first, she seemed polite, beautiful, successful, confident. I wanted to like her. Honestly, I tried. She spoke about luxury neighborhoods, expensive vacations, private clubs, and the importance of surrounding yourself with the right people. Whenever I mentioned our old neighborhood back in Columbus, she'd smile politely before changing the subject. Something about those smiles always felt rehearsed. Ethan slowly began changing too. Our weekly Sunday phone calls became monthly. Monthly became occasional text messages. Then even those became short replies like, "Busy, Mom." I kept making excuses. He's building a career. He's starting a family. Don't be selfish, Margaret. That's what mothers do. We forgive before anyone apologizes. Months later, Ethan invited me to visit his new home in Naperville, Illinois, outside Chicago. I was thrilled. I baked the apple pie he'd loved since childhood, packed photo albums he'd asked about years ago, and even bought a new blue dress because I wanted to look nice. As I drove into his beautiful neighborhood lined with perfectly trimmed lawns and enormous houses, pride filled my heart. I thought I was arriving at the happiest chapter of our lives. I had no idea. I was driving straight toward the moment that would change everything I believed about motherhood forever. The moment Ethan opened the front door, I noticed something was different. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. It was the kind of smile people wear when they're being polite to someone they don't really want to see. Still, I ignored the feeling. I hugged him tightly, but he barely hugged me back. Inside, the house looked like something out of a magazine. Marble countertops, oversized windows, expensive artwork on the walls, and furniture that looked too perfect to sit on. I set my homemade apple pie on the kitchen counter. "I remembered it's your favorite," I said with a smile. Vanessa glanced at it before forcing a small laugh. "Oh, that's sweet. We actually don't eat desserts with sugar anymore." I laughed awkwardly, pretending it didn't sting. For the next hour, I tried to make conversation. I asked Ethan about work, about their plans, about the neighborhood. Most of my questions were answered with one-word replies. Vanessa did most of the talking, constantly mentioning networking events, investors, and people whose names meant nothing to me. Every time I spoke about family memories or Ethan's childhood, the room seemed to grow quieter. Then came dinner. Halfway through the meal, Vanessa casually mentioned they were hosting an important charity gala the following weekend. "We'll have a lot of influential people here," she said proudly. I smiled. "That sounds wonderful. I'd love to help if you need anything." Before Vanessa could answer, Ethan cleared his throat. "Actually, Mom, there's something we need to talk about." The tone of his voice instantly made my stomach tighten. He folded his hands together and stared at the table instead of looking at me. "You've always been an amazing mother." Whenever someone starts a sentence like that, bad news is coming. "We're trying to build a different life now." I nodded slowly. unsure where this was going. Our circle is different. Vanessa quietly reached for his hand. Then he finally looked at me. I don't think you really fit into the life we're creating. For several seconds, I couldn't process what I'd just heard. I'm sorry, what do you mean? He sighed as if this conversation had already been rehearsed dozens of times. Mom, your clothes, your stories, the way you act, it doesn't really match the image we're trying to build. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear him. Vanessa finally spoke. We're not trying to hurt you, Margaret. It's just that appearances matter in Ethan's profession. Then Ethan delivered the sentence that broke me. Mom, you don't belong in my new life. Everything around me seemed to stop. I looked at the little boy I had once carried through hospital emergency rooms after nightmares. The boy whose homework I stayed up helping with. The boy whose college tuition I paid by working double shifts for years. Now he couldn't even meet my eyes. I quietly stood up from the table. I understand, I whispered, though I understood nothing. I picked up my purse, leaving the untouched apple pie behind. Neither of them tried to stop me. As I walked to my car, tears blurred my vision, but I refused to let them see me cry. I drove for hours without knowing where I was going. Somewhere along a quiet highway, I finally pulled over. For the first time since Ethan was born, I asked myself a question I never thought I'd have to answer. If my own son believed I no longer belonged in his life, then where did I belong? I sat in my car until the sun disappeared behind the trees, staring through tear-filled eyes at a future I never expected. For the first time in decades, I wasn't thinking about my son. I was thinking about myself. Somewhere along that lonely highway, I realized something painful. For years, my entire identity had been wrapped up in being Ethan's mother. Every decision, every sacrifice, every dream had revolved around giving him the best life possible. But somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I was more than just someone's parent. When I returned to Columbus, I stopped waiting for my phone to ring. Instead, I started saying yes to life again. I joined a local volunteer program at a children's hospital, where I spent time comforting frightened families. I enrolled in a photography class I'd always wanted to take, but had never made time for. I even reconnected with old friends I hadn't seen in years. Slowly, the emptiness inside me began to fade. One afternoon, while organizing old family photographs, I found a picture of Ethan at 6 years old, grinning from ear to ear after losing his first tooth. I smiled, but this time I didn't cry. That little boy would always have a place in my heart. The man he had become, that was a choice only he could make. Nearly a year passed before my phone finally rang. It was Ethan. His voice sounded different. Quieter. Mom, can we talk? I hesitated before answering. I'm listening. He told me that his company had gone through major layoffs. Many of the people who had once filled his house with laughter and business opportunities had disappeared overnight. Invitations stopped coming. Friends stopped calling. Then, only a few months later, Vanessa left him. According to Ethan, she told him she needed someone whose future looked more secure. The very image they had worked so hard to create had vanished. I've been thinking about what I said to you, he whispered. I don't expect you to forgive me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I answered softly. You didn't just hurt my feelings, Ethan. You made me question whether a mother's love had any value once her child became successful. I could hear him crying. I'm so sorry. His apology was sincere. But apologies don't erase memories. They simply open the door to healing. A few weeks later, we met at a small cafe in Columbus. There were no expensive suits.
No polished speeches.
Just a mother and her son, sitting across from each other, learning how to become family again. I chose forgiveness, not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. Our relationship would never be exactly the same. Some cracks remain, even after they're repaired. But today, I no longer measure my worth by whether someone chooses to include me in their life. I know who I am. I know what I gave. And I know that no title, no neighborhood, no amount of money can determine whether someone belongs. Because real family isn't built on status. It's built on love, respect, gratitude, and the people who stand beside you when everything else falls apart.